It is Friday, February 2026. And if you are listening to this right now, I want you to take a second and just check your pulse.
Good advice.
Yeah, because if you're anything like the markets today or the legal scholars, or frankly, anyone just trying to buy a house or a car right now, your heart rate is probably a little elevated.
Elevated is, well, it's a very polite way of putting it. I'd say we are collectively hyperventilating at this point.
We are looking at a day and really an entire week that I think historians are going to circle in red ink. It's a moment of absolute whiplash for the global economy.
Total whiplash.
We literally have a Supreme Court ruling that fundamentally rewrote the rules of global trade at 10 in the morning, and then a White House that just rewrote them right back again by 2 in the afternoon.
Right. It's the kind of week where you have constitutional law, high-stakes finance, and these incredibly gritty, street-level survival strategies all just colliding at once.
Usually these things happen in silos.
Exactly. The Supreme Court does its thing over here. Wall Street does its thing over there. But today, it's all one big messy soup.
We have a massive stack of sources to get through for this deep dive. Breaking financial news, Supreme Court opinions, some really dense economic data reports on GDP and inflation. Plus, we've got industry-specific research covering tech, autos, and private credit.
It's a mountain of paper.
It is. So our mission today is to connect these dots for you. We want to take these headlines from the marble steps of the Supreme Court all the way down to the trading desks at Blue Owl Capital and figure out something fundamental.
Is the system just creaking, or is it actually breaking?
That is the ultimate question.
And the theme you're going to hear us come back to again and again today is the tension between policy and reality.
Right.
The gap between what the law says should happen and what is actually happening to your wallet. So where are we starting?
Let's start at the top, the big one. The trade war, or I guess more accurately, the constitutional crisis that's currently masquerading as trade policy.
Yeah, let's get into it. For the last year or so, the single biggest question in global economics has been whether the president actually has the authority to impose these sweeping reciprocal tariffs on basically everything.
And today, the Supreme Court gave us an answer.
They did.
And it was not a maybe.
No, it was a hard no. In a 6-3 decision, the court struck down President Trump's reciprocal tariffs. This is an absolute thunderclap moment.
A total shockwave.
Chief Justice Roberts wrote the majority opinion, and he was incredibly specific. We need to be clear here. The ruling wasn't about whether tariffs are good or bad economics. It wasn't about the philosophy of free trade.
It was purely about the legal tool.
Exactly. It was about the tool the president used to implement them.
He used IEEPA, right? The International Emergency Economic Powers Act.
Correct, IEPA. And to understand why this matters to you, the consumer, we have to go back to 1977, which is when IEPA was passed. The historical context there is vital.
Right, 1977. So this law was designed for things like the Iran hostage crisis. It was designed to give the president a hammer to freeze the assets of terrorists or rogue states or drug cartels during a literal national emergency.
Exactly, a break glass in case of war kind of law.
Right.
It was never intended to be a line-item veto for the United States tax code. And that is exactly what Chief Justice Roberts zeroed in on today.
He basically argued that using emergency powers to regulate the price of toaster ovens or steel from allied nations is a fundamental violation of the separation of powers.
Yes, because if you let a president use IEPA for general trade disputes, you are effectively making the president a king of commerce. Congress totally loses its constitutional power to tax and regulate trade.
Okay, so legally, constitutionally, that makes sense. But here is where my brain starts to hurt trying to process this. These tariffs aren't theoretical.
Not at all.
They've been in place. Real companies have paid actual billions of dollars in duties under this law over the last year. So if the Supreme Court steps in today and says, hey, that law was illegal from the start, what happens to all that money?
That is the $175 billion question.
Wait, $175 billion with a B.
With a B. That's the estimate we have from the Penn-Wharton budget model. That is how much the U.S. government could potentially owe in refunds to corporate importers.
Okay, walk me through the actual mechanics of this, because my mind immediately goes to the Treasury just cutting a massive check to Walmart and Target tomorrow. Is that how it works?
I really wish it were that simple.
Yeah.
If it were just writing a check, we'd be dealing with a huge budget deficit issue, sure, but the logistics would be clean.
Right.
The reality is what Justice Kavanaugh called a logistical nightmare in his dissent. You have to remember how tariffs work in the real world. A
Mhm.
company imports a container of, let's say, widgets from overseas.
Mhm.
They pay the duty to Customs and Border Protection at the port. That money then goes straight into the Treasury's general fund.
And the government spends it immediately.
Correct. It's gone. It's been spent on defense or
Yeah.
interest on the national debt or Social Security. It's out the door. So first, Congress would potentially have to pass a new law to appropriate the refund money. Can you imagine the political fight on Capitol Hill over appropriating $175 billion to pay back corporations?
It sounds like an absolute non-starter in this political climate.
But the bigger issue, and this is the one Kavanaugh really hammered on in his dissent, is the pass-through problem.
A pass-through problem. Explain that.
Let's say you are a major retailer. You imported washing machines in 2025, and you paid a 25% tariff at the port.
Right?
You didn't just eat that loss, you passed it on. You raised the retail price of that washing machine by $100. The consumer, you, me, the listener, we paid the tariff.
I paid $100 more for my washer at checkout.
Exactly. So now if the court orders the government to refund the tariff, who gets the check from the Treasury?
The retailer.
The retailer. They get a massive windfall. They effectively get paid twice, once by the consumer at the cash register in 2025 and once by the government in 2026. This is what lawyers call unjust enrichment.
And meanwhile, I don't get a check for my $100.
Exactly. There is absolutely no mechanism to track down every single person who bought a washing machine last year and send them a partial refund check. It's impossible.
So Kavanaugh is warning that this ruling creates a situation where we are basically transferring wealth from the taxpayer generally to specific corporate importers, while the actual consumer gets nothing.
Yes. And he points out that it disrupts trade deals worth trillions because it throws the certainty of revenue collection into the shredder. If foreign trading partners see that our tariff system can be unwound retroactively, it completely destabilizes negotiations.
That sounds incredibly messy.
Mess was the exact word Kavanaugh used. He predicted total chaos in the customs courts for the next decade.
Okay, so that's the legal bomb that dropped at 10 in the morning. President Trump, naturally, had something to say about this.
He did, and it was very personal.
He called the decision deeply disappointing and explicitly said he was ashamed of the court.
He specifically called out his own appointees, Justices Gorsuch and Barrett, for siding with the majority.
But he didn't just post on Truth Social and give up. This is where the whiplash happens, because usually when the Supreme Court says stop, the executive branch stops.
Not this time. This is where we see that policy versus reality friction perfectly illustrated. The president essentially said, fine, EPA is off the table, I have other tools in the toolbox, and just hours later, he announced a new 10% global tariff.
On everything.
On everything. And he's swapping legal vehicles. He's moving from the 1977 IEPA law to Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974.
Okay, you're going to have to explain Section 122 to us. I feel like we're getting a crash course in obscure legal codes today. How is Section 122 different from the Emergency Powers Act?
It's a fascinating pivot from the White House because Section 122 is actually more draconian in the short term, but much weaker in the long term. Section 122 is designed specifically for balance of payments deficits.
Meaning we are buying more from the rest of the world than we are selling to them.
Exactly. The law says that if the U.S. is hemorrhaging cash to foreign markets, the president can unilaterally impose a surcharge up to 15% on imports to stop the bleeding. But here is the massive catch. It has a stopwatch attached to it.
A time limit.
Yes, 150 days.
That's it, less than 5 months.
Unless Congress explicitly votes to extend it. So IEPA was attractive to the administration because an emergency can technically last forever. We are literally still in national emergencies declared back in the 90s. But Section 122 forces a showdown with Congress in less than half a year.
So he's essentially buying time.
He's buying time and maintaining the status quo for the markets. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was out on the wires almost immediately, telling the press that revenue projections for 2026 remain virtually unchanged. They're just swapping one legal justification for another to keep the cash register ringing.
It feels a bit like a game of legal whack-a-mole. A court hits one tariff and another pops right up. But I want to talk about the actual businesses caught in the middle of this. Because if I'm running a furniture store or an auto plant, do we really care if my paperwork says Section 122 or IEEPA?
You care deeply about the legal stability, but mostly you just care that your costs aren't going down. And this is a crucial distinction that completely got lost in the mainstream headlines today. The Supreme Court ruling didn't wipe away all tariffs.
Right, there are other buckets of tariffs.
Exactly. The ruling only struck down IEPA tariffs. But Section 232 tariffs, which are based on a totally different justification, national security, those remain completely in effect.
Okay, Section 232. This is the one that says we can't rely on foreign steel because we need to be able to build tanks if there's a war, right?
That was the original intent of the law back in the Cold War era. But that definition of national security has been stretched like a rubber band over the last few years. Right now, Section 232 is being applied to things like upholstered furniture, kitchen cabinets, and bathroom vanities.
Wait, how is a bathroom vanity a national security threat? Are we worried about a strategic shortage of sinks for the military?
The administration's argument is about the industrial base. The logic is that if you lose the domestic ability to make cabinets, you lose the woodworking machinery and the skilled labor pool that might be needed for something else in a wartime scenario. The very broad interpretation. But for the furniture industry, it means duties of around 25% are still there, totally untouched by the Supreme Court today.
And for a small business, that kind of hit is crushing.
It's existential. I was reading an industry deep dive on the furniture sector just this morning. The big players, companies like RH or Wayfair, they have massive balance sheets. They can absorb a 25% hit, or they have the leverage to force their suppliers in Vietnam to lower wholesale prices.
They can throw their weight around.
Exactly. But the small, family-owned furniture store on Main Street, they can't do that. They have zero leverage. They're paying the full 25% duty, and they have to pass that on to a consumer who is already stretched thin.
So the little guy is taking the brunt of the hit.
Precisely. And it's not just couches and cabinets, it's cars. Autos are facing huge Section 232 liabilities right now. GM expects $3 billion to $4 billion in tariff costs this year alone. Ford is looking at $2 billion.
Billion with a B.
Yes. These costs don't vanish just because the Supreme Court ruled on a different legal code this morning. And the farm industry is still facing threats of 200% tariffs to try and force domestic manufacturing of medicine.
So, despite all the push alerts saying the president lost in court, the reality on the ground is that the squeeze on businesses is still very much on.
The squeeze is on, and arguably the uncertainty is actually worse now, because now every business owner has to wonder, will Congress extend the Section 122 tariffs in 150 days? Will there be another lawsuit that strikes these down? You cannot plan a global supply chain when the rules of the game change every 4 hours.
And yet, and this is the part that always drives me crazy, the stock market actually went up today. The S&P 500 was up almost 0.7%. Gold surged over 1%.
Right.
Why is Wall Street cheering for chaos?
It's a Pavlovian response. The trading algorithms scan the headlines, they read tariff struck down, and they instantly execute buy orders. They see the removal of a tariff as a tax cut for corporations. They're hoping that the refunds, however legally messy they might be, will act as a massive stimulus injection.
They're betting on the windfall.
They are. They want that $175 billion injected back into corporate balance sheets. But the surge in gold tells a very different story. Gold is where capital goes when investors are scared. It's the ultimate safe haven asset.
So you have stocks partying on the hope of free money, while the smart money is quietly buying gold because they see the institutional instability.
Exactly. It's a split screen market.
Okay, so that's the trade chaos. But while the lawyers were fighting over import duties, we actually got a report card on the real economy. The Q4 2025 GDP numbers dropped today.
They did.
And they missed. Badly.
Missed is putting it mildly. The consensus estimate from economists was 2.5% growth for the fourth quarter. We got 1.4%.
That is a massive deceleration. What happened? Where did the growth go?
The primary culprit being cited across the board is the government shutdown we had late last year. It was a record-length shutdown, and we are finally seeing the macroeconomic bill come due. Economists estimate it cost the U.S. economy about a full percentage point of growth.
Just from the government being closed?
Yes. When you turn off the federal government for weeks on end, federal contractors don't get paid, national parks close and decimate local tourism, regulatory approvals for new businesses stop dead in their tracks, it literally freezes the gears of the economy.
Now, I want to touch on something incredibly weird that happened with this data release. GDP numbers are supposed to be sacred, right? They come out at exactly 8:30 a.m. Eastern. There's a whole strict protocol to prevent insider trading based on this data.
It's called the lockup. Financial reporters and key government officials get the data early so they can write their stories, but they are physically locked in a room without internet or cell service until exactly 8:30 a.m. It's highly controlled.
Yet at 7:50 a.m., a full 40 minutes before the official release, President Trump was posting on Truth Social about the data.
It was.
He posted that the numbers would be bad, and he blamed the Democrat shutdown for costing the U.S. at least 2 points in GDP. Is that even allowed?
Allowed is a tricky word here. Technically, the President of the United States is the ultimate classifying authority. He has the power to declassify and release any government data whenever he wants.
But ethically, normally.
Ethically, it's a massive breach of historical protocol. It creates a wildly uneven playing field for financial markets. If you happen to be awake and following the president on Truth Social, you got a 40-minute head start on the rest of Wall Street to trade on that GDP mess.
He effectively front-ran his own Bureau of Economic Analysis.
He did. Now, the administration is calling it a leak, but it was really a deliberate narrative frame.
Right, getting ahead of the story.
Exactly. The administration's argument, and to be fair, we have to look at both sides here, is that the public deserved to know immediately that the bad numbers were a result of congressional gridlock, not executive policy. The other side of the aisle argues it was a blatant manipulation of market timing to dodge accountability.
Impartial reporting noted, but stepping back from the politics of the leak, the numbers themselves are bad. And it's not just that growth is slowing down, it's that inflation is still incredibly sticky.
That's the other half of the misery index we got today. The core PCE, which stands for Personal Consumption Expenditures, held steady at 3%.
And just for context, the PCE is the Federal Reserve's favorite inflation gauge, right?
Yes, the Fed watches PCE closer than the CPI, and their target is 2%. We're stuck at 3%.
So we have slowing economic growth at 1.4% and high inflation stuck at 3%.
That is starting to smell a lot like stagflation. And it puts the Federal Reserve in a terrible, terrible box. They desperately want to cut interest rates to stimulate growth, but they can't cut rates because inflation is still running way too hot.
And who pays the ultimate price for that kind of macro-level gridlock? The consumer. We got some data on consumer debt today that is, frankly, terrifying. We talk about a K-shaped recovery a lot on this show, where the wealthy get wealthier and the working class gets poorer. This data absolutely proves it.
It really does. It's a tale of two economies. If you were lucky enough to lock in a 3% mortgage back in 2021, you're fine. Your housing cost is fixed. But if you are living on credit cards and variable rate loans right now, you are drowning.
Let's look at the student loan data first. The delinquency rate just jumped to nearly 25%.
Let's just pause on that number for a second. 1 in 4 student loan borrowers is currently behind on their payments. For comparison, in 2019, before the pandemic, that number was around 9%. We've nearly tripled the delinquency rate.
And the demographic breakdown of who is defaulting is heartbreaking.
It's catastrophic for minority borrowers. The data shows nearly 1 in 2 Black borrowers are currently behind. And geographically, in states like Louisiana and Mississippi, the overall delinquency rate is pushing 40%. This isn't just a few people forgetting to pay. This is a systemic failure.
So why is this happening right now? Is it purely the broader economy, or is there a specific policy angle driving this massive spike?
It's the policy versus reality theme rearing its head again. We have totally conflicting narratives here. The Century Foundation, which is a left-leaning think tank, just put out a report blaming the current administration's drastic cuts to the Department of Education staff.
How does staffing affect whether I pay my loan?
Their argument is that because so many federal workers and contractors were fired or furloughed, the administrative machinery is broken. There is literally no one there to answer the phone and help struggling borrowers navigate the incredibly complex paperwork to get into income-driven repayment plans. They want to pay, but the system won't let them easily restructure.
Okay, and what is the current administration's defense against that?
The administration argues that the underlying economic data was always this bad, but the previous Biden administration was masking it.
Masking it how?
With the pandemic payment pauses and those year-long on-ramp periods where missed payments didn't get reported to credit bureaus, the current administration says they aren't causing the defaults. They're just finally ripping the Band-Aid off and showing the true, ugly reality of the student debt crisis that was hidden for years.
Regardless of whose political fault it is, the practical result is millions of Americans waking up with ruined credit scores. And what do people do when their credit cards are maxed out and their student loans are in default? They try to find a lifeline. They try to refinance.
And that leads us directly into what analysts are calling the personal loan trap. We are seeing a massive surge in unsecured personal loans being originated right now. This is being aggressively pitched by online lenders as a middle-class bailout option. The pitch is simple. Take out a personal loan to consolidate and pay off your high-interest credit cards.
Now, in theory, if I'm taking a personal finance class, that's smart advice, right? Consolidate high-interest debt into lower-interest debt.
In theory, yes. If you can trade a 28% credit card balance for a 10% personal loan, you do that all day long. But these subprime borrowers aren't qualifying for 10%. They're swapping 28% credit card debt for a 24% personal loan. The actual interest savings are negligible.
So why do it?
Because it frees up the limit on the credit card. And the behavior is the real problem. You take the loan, you pay off the Visa card, you feel this immense psychological relief, and then, because inflation is still at 3% and groceries are expensive, you run the Visa card right back up again.
Oh, wow.
Now you have the fixed 24% loan payment every month, plus the new 28% credit card minimum payment. It's a complete financial death spiral. And we are seeing the results. Serious delinquencies on credit cards, meaning payments that are 90 days or more late, are rising to 7.1%. We are creaking steadily back toward 2008 levels of consumer distress.
Now contrast that with mortgages.
Exactly. Yeah. Mortgage delinquencies remain incredibly low and stable. Borrowers will miss a credit card payment, they will miss a student loan payment, but they are prioritizing their homes because they have those locked-in low rates from a few years ago and they have built up equity. They will not let go of that house.
Okay, so we have a messy trade war, slowing GDP growth, sticky inflation, and a very clear consumer debt crisis. But I want to pivot to something from our sources that might seem a little obscure to the average listener at first glance, but it had Wall Street absolutely panic today. A company called Blue Owl.
This is arguably the story that matters most for the actual plumbing of the financial system. Blue Owl Capital. They are an absolute titan in the world of private credit.
We hear the term private credit thrown around a lot on financial networks. Can we take a second to clearly define that? How is a private credit firm different from me walking into a Chase branch for a commercial loan?
Think of private credit as shadow banking. After the 2008 financial crash, the federal government came down hard on the big traditional banks, JP Morgan, Citi, Bank of America. They passed Dodd-Frank and basically told banks they had to hold more capital and be incredibly careful. The government said, do not lend to risky, unproven companies.
So the banks pulled back?
They pulled way back. They stopped lending to startups, mid-sized tech firms, companies without perfect balance sheets. But those companies still needed capital to grow.
Enter private credit.
Enter private credit. Firms like Blue Owl, Blackstone, Apollo, they operate outside the traditional banking regulations. They raise massive pools of money from wealthy investors and institutions, and they lend that money directly to these riskier companies at high interest rates. It has ballooned into a $1.7 trillion industry, and Blue Owl specifically. They specialize in lending to software companies. Roughly 70% of their entire loan book is tied to tech.
So what exactly happened with Blue Owl today that spooked the markets?
They executed a massive sale. They sold $1.4 billion worth of their loans to other institutional investors.
Okay, but financial companies sell assets all the time.
It's the mechanics of how they sold them and why. They sold these loans at 99.7% of par value.
Par value meaning the face value of the loan.
Yes. That means they sold them for almost exactly what they were worth. They didn't take a massive loss.
I'm confused. If I sell my house for full asking price, that's fantastic news. Why is the market freaking out about a profitable full-price sale by Blue Owl?
Because the market is looking at the underlying motivation. They didn't sell these loans to lock in a profit. They sold them because they needed cash immediately. Alongside the sale, Blue Owl announced they're completely restructuring how investors get their money back. They're replacing their voluntary quarterly redemptions with mandated capital distributions.
Okay, we need to translate that from hedge fund speak to human speak. What does that actually mean for an investor?
It means the ATM is broken. Usually, if you invest in Blue Owl, you can request your money back once a quarter. That's a voluntary redemption. Blue Owl is now legally changing the rules and saying, no, we are halting redemptions. You cannot ask for your money back. We will distribute capital to you only when we decide we have enough cash to do so.
That sounds exactly like a liquidity crunch.
It's a textbook liquidity crunch. The broader market looks at that $1.4 billion loan sale, even at a great price, and says, Blue Owl is so desperate for immediate cash to meet investor demands that they are forced to liquidate their best assets and then lock the doors behind them.
And if the lender is desperate for cash,
It means the system is clogging up. This is why you saw prominent voices like Mohammed El-Arian asking out loud today if this is the canary in the coal mine. He explicitly compared it to the Bear Stearns credit funds freezing up in the summer of 2007.
we really do not like 2007 comparisons on this show. That never ends well.
No, we don't. The core tension here is the mismatch between illiquid assets and liquid liabilities. Private credit holds illiquid assets. These loans to software companies take years to mature. You can't just log on to E-Trade and click a button to sell a $50 million loan to a private tech startup. It takes months to find a buyer.
But the investors want their money now.
Right. The people who gave Blue Owl the money want liquid access to their cash. When everyone rushes for the exit at the exact same time and the money is tied up in loans that cannot be sold instantly, boom, the fund freezes.
And who are these investors? Is it just billionaires and sovereign wealth funds taking a hit?
This is the part that should scare the average person. Treasury Secretary Bessent actually flagged this specific risk today. The biggest buyers of private credit debt over the last few years have been insurance companies.
Like life insurance companies.
Yes. Life insurance providers and annuity managers. They take your monthly premiums, and instead of buying super safe treasury bonds, they've been giving that money to firms like Blue Owl to chase a 10% return. But if Blue Owl locks the doors and halts redemptions,
Then the life insurance company cannot access the cash they need to pay out claims.
exactly, we are seeing a dangerous risk migration. In 2008, the risk was concentrated in the banks. We regulated the banks, so the risk moved into unregulated private credit. And now, that private credit risk is migrating directly into the insurance sector, which holds the retirement savings of millions of Americans. It's a systemic risk hidden deep in the plumbing of the economy.
So we have the macro view clearly established. The skyscrapers of high finance are shaking. But I want to take the elevator all the way down to the street level for a minute. Because when we talk about this K-shaped recovery and systemic stress, it isn't just about debt statistics or hedge fund liquidity. It's about the very basic reality of where people sleep at night.
This is where the story gets incredibly visceral. We need to talk about vanlords.
Vanlords? I saw the photos in the deep dive report you sent over this morning. It looks like a dilapidated campsite, but it's set up on a public industrial road right in the middle of Silicon Valley.
It's a truly dystopian evolution of the housing crisis. We all know the Bay Area is notoriously expensive, but this is an entirely new shadow market emerging. Vanlords are individuals who buy up old, broken-down RVs. We're talking ancient Winnebagos that probably don't even have engines that run anymore.
Right.
They tow them to a public street in Santa Clara County, park them permanently, and act as landlords, renting them out.
Wait, let me make sure I have this straight. So the person actually living in the RV on the street doesn't even own the vehicle. They are paying rent to someone else to live in a vehicle parked illegally on city property.
That is correct. It is an unregulated shadow rental market. They are paying between $500 and $800 a month to the vanlords.
That is insane. $500 for a broken down van.
Is it insane, though? You have to compare it to the local market realities. A single bedroom in a shared house in San Jose might cost $1,500 right now. A basic studio apartment is easily $3,000 a month. If you are an immigrant or working a minimum wage service job, $500 is literally the only number on the board that works for your budget.
But for that $500, you are getting absolutely nothing in terms of infrastructure.
Nothing. You get a roof, you get no running water, no proper sewage hookup, no electricity.
It's a public health hazard and blight, but it's also pure survival for these renters.
Exactly. And the municipalities are completely flailing trying to deal with it. San Jose tried to engineer a fix for this recently. They spent $24 million to create what they called a safe parking site at the Berryessa Transit Center. They took a lot, paved it properly, put in public showers, laundry facilities, and round-the-clock security.
That sounds genuinely helpful, like a step in the right direction.
It is helpful for the people who get in. But the scale of the government response is wildly off. That $24 million site helps maybe 80 or 100 families. The wait lists for these safe parking sites are completely full. It's a drop in the bucket. Meanwhile, there are thousands of people living in these unregulated RVs on the streets.
And San Francisco tried a similar municipal response too, right? And it fails.
Spectacularly. They set up a designated site near Candlestick Point. But, and this is just a perfect example of bureaucratic failure, the city couldn't get the local utility to hook up the electricity grid to the site in time.
So what did they do?
They brought in massive industrial diesel generators to power the RVs.
I can imagine the local neighbors love that solution.
It was an absolute disaster. The noise of the generators running 24/7, the diesel fumes blanketing the neighborhood. The local residents revolted, filed endless complaints, and the city ultimately had to shut the entire site down.
So now you have this perverse situation where the landlord, who is arguably a predatory actor renting out an unsafe, uninspected vehicle, is the only person providing housing that actually functions at a price point people can afford, while the government's multi-million-dollar official solution is totally tangled in red tape and noise complaints.
That's the tragic irony of it. And we really need to think about the demographics of who is living in these RVs. We aren't just talking about the stereotypical unhoused demographic often portrayed in the media.
No, we are talking about the full-time workforce.
Exactly. We are talking about the people serving lunch at the Apple and Google cafeterias, the janitors cleaning the Blue Owl offices we just discussed, the immigrant laborers building the new tech campuses. They are the physical engine of Silicon Valley, and they are sleeping in rented RVs without flushing toilets because the math of the local economy is completely broken.
That is a remarkably stark image, from the people cleaning the tech offices to the people running them, because there was a lot of movement in the actual C-suites of big tech this week, too.
A major changing of the guard, specifically at Xbox.
Phil Spencer is officially retiring.
This is a huge, huge deal for the gaming industry. Phil Spencer has been at Microsoft for 38 years. He ran the entire Xbox division for the last 12. He is widely viewed as the gamer CEO.
He wears the graphic t-shirts on stage. He visibly plays the games on his live profile.
Right. He is universally credited with turning the Xbox brand around after that disastrous Xbox One launch back in 2013. He brought goodwill back to the platform.
And his successor is not a traditional gaming executive.
Not at all. Her name is Asha Sharma, and she comes directly from the world of AI and data. She was previously a high-level executive at Instacart and at Meta.
That feels like a very, very deliberate signal from Microsoft to the market.
It's a massive signal. If you look at the Q4 data, Xbox gaming revenue was down nearly 10% last quarter. Hardware sales, the actual physical consoles people buy, are struggling mightily against Sony's PlayStation. Microsoft appointing Sharma is basically them telling Wall Street, the future of our gaming division isn't selling plastic boxes under the TV, the future is integrating artificial intelligence.
But the gaming community generally hates AI right now. I mean, if you look at the discourse online, there's a tremendous amount of fear and pushback about AI generating in-game art, or writing bad dialogue for characters, or replacing voice actors.
Soulless AI slop.
Excuse me.
That was the exact phrase Akarma used in her internal introductory memo to the Xbox staff. She promised explicitly not to flood the gaming ecosystem with soulless AI slop.
That is a very specific, carefully chosen choice of words for a new CEO.
It's brilliant PR damage control right out of the gate. She clearly knows her audience. She is acknowledging the community's primary fear immediately. But make absolutely no mistake, her background is entirely in AI. Microsoft is the single biggest investor in artificial intelligence on the planet right now. They are absolutely going to try to integrate AI into Xbox gaming, whether it's creating dynamic NPCs that talk to you or procedural content generation. She was hired to manage that incredibly delicate transition.
Speaking of tech giants and their massive struggles with public perception, Meta, the company formerly known as Facebook, just got publicly dumped.
They did. They got dumped by the PTA.
The National Parent-Teacher Association.
The one and only. This is a staggering optics blow for Mark Zuckerberg. For years, Meta has heavily funded the National PTA to help run various programs on digital safety for kids. It was a primary way for Meta to point to something and say, look, we are actively working side by side with America's parents to keep kids safe on our platforms.
And the PTA finally said enough is enough.
They did. They completely ended the financial funding relationship. The catalyst is the sheer volume of ongoing child safety lawsuits. Mark Zuckerberg was literally just testifying under oath in Los Angeles Superior Court regarding allegations that Meta knowingly misled the public about the severe addictiveness of Instagram and Facebook for teenagers.
There is a pretty damning watchdog report about this specific Meta PTA partnership recently too, right?
Yes. A tech watchdog group published a report accusing Meta of using the PTA funding partnership specifically to shape the narrative around child safety. The allegation is that Meta was basically buying the silence, or at least the passive cooperation, of the largest parents' union in the country, while internal data showed their apps were allegedly causing severe mental anguish and harm to minors.
It's pretty hard to stand up in court and claim you're the good guy protecting kids when the National PTA refuses to even touch your money anymore.
Exactly. It validates all the critics. It's a glaring sign that the Meta brand is becoming increasingly toxic in the one demographic they absolutely need on their side:
Yeah.
suburban parents.
And just to round out this entire tech in court segment we have going on today, Tesla took a major hit.
A $243 million hit, to be precise.
This was the ruling on the autopilot verdict.
Yes. A federal judge just officially denied Tesla's legal bid to overturn a jury verdict. This all stems from a highly publicized 2019 fatal crash in Key Largo, Florida.
Remind us of the specifics of that incident.
It's a tragic story. The driver of the Tesla dropped his smartphone on the floorboard. He reached down to pick it up, totally taking his eyes off the road, because he assumed the autopilot system would automatically brake the car at an approaching T intersection.
And it didn't break.
It did not. The car accelerated straight through the intersection, and the driver was killed in the resulting crash. The jury found that Tesla was partially liable for the death.
Because of the naming convention, the fact that they call it autopilot.
That is the core of the legal argument. The plaintiffs successfully argued that naming the system autopilot and simultaneously marketing a package called full self-driving creates a lethal false sense of security for the average driver. It makes people genuinely think the car can do things it simply cannot do technologically. By upholding this massive $243 million verdict, the federal court is sending a warning shot. They are saying, yes, your marketing language matters. You cannot overpromise on safety features when lives are at stake.
We have covered a lot of incredibly heavy material today. We've got global trade wars, constitutional crises, student debt spirals, hedge fund liquidity crunches, dystopian RV housing, and fatal corporate lawsuits. But I want to try and end our analysis today on one weird little economic wildcard that is currently playing out. It's tax season.
Yes. The Trump bump.
We have major new tax laws that just kicked in for this filing season, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
I still legitimately struggle to say that legislative name out loud with a straight face, but yes, that is the actual law. It was signed back in July of 2025. It eliminated all federal taxes on overtime pay and tipped wages, and importantly, it allowed consumers to deduct up to $10,000 in interest paid on auto loans, provided the vehicle was assembled in the United States.
And because that law was made retroactive to the start of January 2025, people filing right now are seeing unexpectedly big refunds.
Huge refunds. The early IRS data shows the average tax refund is up almost 11% compared to last year. The average check hitting bank accounts right now is around $2,290.
So here's the multi-billion-dollar macroeconomic question. What do American consumers actually do with that sudden injection of cash?
This is the ultimate boom or bust test for the auto industry right now. Historically, March is always a massive month for car sales because people reliably use their tax refund as a down payment on a new vehicle. The entire auto industry is currently praying that consumers take that $2,290 and march straight into a dealership to buy a new Ford F-150.
But cars are incredibly expensive right now. The average transaction price for a new vehicle is still hovering right around $50,000. And interest rates, even with this new tax deduction, are still painfully high compared to a few years ago.
That's the friction point in the data. You have a $2,000 check from the IRS in your right hand, but you also have that $20,000 credit card balance we talked about earlier in your left hand.
The credit card with the 28% interest rate.
Exactly. If consumer confidence is low, and we know from the polling that it is currently at multi-year lows, rational economic behavior dictates that you use the windfall to pay down the crushing debt.
Yeah.
You don't use it to take on $50,000 of brand new debt for a pickup truck.
So if people use the tax refund to pay off Visa and MasterCard instead of buying a Ford or a Chevy, the manufacturing economy slows down even more.
That is the big fear on Wall Street. The Trump bump might ultimately just end up being a backdoor bailout for the credit card companies, rather than the intended stimulus for the domestic manufacturing sector.
Man, what a week.
It really is a week where the facade of the economy visibly cracked.
When you pull all these threads together, the picture is intense. We saw the Supreme Court try to legally rein in executive power on trade, only for the executive branch to immediately sidestep the ruling and keep the tariffs grinding away. We saw the macro GDP numbers proving that the whole soft landing narrative is actually pretty hard for the working class. And we saw the literal plumbing of the financial system, from the student loan servicers to the private credit markets at Blue Owl, start to spring some very serious leaks.
And at the absolute bottom of that economic ladder, absorbing all the shocks, we have the vanlords of Silicon Valley.
You know, if I had to pick one single word to synthesize all this material today, I keep going back to the concept of liquidity.
That's interesting. I would actually say safety.
Safety, how so?
Think about the underlying motivation behind every story we discussed. Everyone at every level is just scrambling for safety right now. The institutional investors at Blue Owl want their cash back immediately because they don't feel their capital is safe. The federal government wants sweeping tariffs because they claim they need to protect national safety and the industrial base. Families in Santa Clara are paying $500 a month just to have a relatively safe place to park a broken-down van so they can go to work.
Everyone is just frantically trying to build a moat around themselves.
Exactly. In a global system that feels increasingly fragile and unpredictable, everyone is just trying to grab hold of something solid, whether that solid thing is a bar of gold or a federal tax refund or just a legal parking spot.
And with the very definition of emergency powers being rewritten in real time by the courts and the White House, the definition of what is actually safe just keeps changing too.
That is the provocative thought I want the listener to take into the weekend and really mull over. With all these legal precedents shifting and debt levels hitting critical mass across the board, are we just looking at the new messy normal? Or are these the audible cracks in the foundation before a structural break?
On that incredibly cheery and thought-provoking note, thanks for joining us for another deep dive into the sources. We'll be watching the fallout from all of this over the weekend, and we'll be right back here next week to help you make sense of whatever breaks next.
Stay curious, everyone.